My name's Conrad Simpson. I'm VP of Sales for Telco for Dimelo, and today I'll be talking about the journey to social CRM maturity. Good morning, everybody. So yes, today I want to, give the vendor perspective on the maturity of social CRM, digital customer engagement. It is a controversial subject. It tends to sort of polarize audiences, so I'll try to stay away from some of the controversial stuff. Perhaps we can discuss that in the break. Just by way of background, I come at this from the contact center. I spent sort of 15, 18 years in the contact center space working with vendors. And it's really interesting to see now in this new digital age how a lot of organizations, particularly the telcos that I talk to, are struggling with this transition. If you look at the traditional voice marketplaces where they use technologies like IVR and some of these traditional technologies, where they're not really focused on engaging with customers on the customer's terms. It's all about what the telco wants rather than what the customer wants. And I think that's where we're seeing the shift. We're seeing the empowerment of consumers, as we saw from the presentation from EY just now, and I think that's going to continue. And I don't know whether all of the telcos that we see in the market today are geared up for that in terms of their approach. Now, when I go to events, I always get asked, and this is the first question that gets asked of me, is how do we not make mistakes on social media and digital customer engagement? It gets asked of me time and time again. And I was going to use a telco example, but then I thought perhaps that's not fair in this audience. You know this guy. His name is Michael OLeary. He's from a company called Ryanair. He's no fool because he's built an airline that's bigger than British Airways. But if you've been watching the press over the last 5 or 6 months, they've been trying to rein him in from talking to the public too much, and he's taking a bit of a back seat. Now, I'm going to show you some text from an article that was in The Guardian. You can Google this, probably two months ago, 10 weeks ago. As they started to move him back from the public face, OLeary said that the new grown-up Ryanair sounds very dull, but that's where it's got to be, and the airline plans to communicate directly with customers and allow them to register on their own website. This is the end of the article. OLeary, who's a recent enthusiast to Twitter and social media, says that the future is in CRM. We're going to get people to register and CRM the hell out of. Now, that for me is an amazing statement for a CEO to make, but even he is starting to be convinced of the value of kind of engaging with customers in this new digital world. And in fact, as a result of that, they did actually give Michael OLeary a 1-hour Q&A session on Twitter with the public. And as you might imagine, there were lots of people wanting to moan about how the airlines treated them, but they deliver on the promise that they offer, which is a low-cost airline. But just to show you how far away he was from it, somebody posted a question, a lady here called a critic, and his response was, nice picture from Michael OLeary as the CEO. And of course, people are now giving him a hard time for this. And there's another example here where somebody asked a question around, are you considering charging fat people more to travel on your flights? And obviously I've got a vested interest in that question. And his response was, I'm opposed to charging fat people, but we're going to also against charging skinny people as well. We welcome all. So, I mean, the message for me really here is I'm not sure all of the executives have got this stuff yet. And we're starting to see that in terms of the way that often companies struggle in the telco space to get investment. But for sure, our view is that the new channels are here. They're coming thick and fast. And, of course, the operators that we talk to are very focused on delivering that customer service in an effective way. Not just in the newer channels like social media, but also in some of the legacy channels. So, again, lots of people that we're engaging with going back to things like SMS, going back to things like email as well. We see examples of it all the time. I get very frustrated by getting emails from my telco which says, don't reply to this email. Or I get a text, with some information that says, don't reply to it. Well, if you're engaging with me, surely I should be able to reply to that. You want a relationship with me, let's talk. Of course, your reputation is very visible now. It's owned by others. We all know about those Twitter horror stories where people have made mistakes. And I don't think we're going to see that changing. And on the back of that, in terms of transparency, we are starting to see some of the telcos use the analytics and publish the data so that they're in a position to be measured by their peers. I think there was a lot of concern about this, and we have seen some of them sort of standing around the edge of the dance floor, if you like, not willing to take that jump in, but we are seeing some of them try to push that out. And I think we'll see that transparency continue. So our view is that actually all channels should be open all the time. When we first looked at social CRM or digital engagement, everybody rushed towards communities and forums, and you're probably aware of the case studies that has been heavily publicised of people like giffgaff with a very simple SIM-only proposition. And I think a lot of the business cases there were sold on the basis, look, you can do this stuff with a digital community. You don't need any call centre people, right? This is very, very low cost. Zero touch, I think, was a term that was used. And of course, lots of people rushed to that end of the scale. I think what they found subsequent to that is actually, no, they need to take a much more holistic approach. It's not just about being at one end of the scale from a community perspective, or indeed from a digital perspective with social media. You actually have to be in all of those channels, whether they're blogs, whether they're legacy technologies. And certainly we're starting to see them publicising, as I said before, their data around customer satisfaction. So Net Promoter has been around for a while. We're starting to see something materialise now around sort of customer effort. So customer effort statistics started to be published publicly in terms of measuring telcos against their peers. So what do we, I mean, from our perspective, we see there's three components for success. Of course, you've got to have a great underlying technology, and of course, Dimelo has that platform. And it has to be not siloed. I think if you look back at traditional care, that's where we had huge problems. Companies went out and bought lots of this call centre stuff. You need a call centre, you buy an ACD. You need an IVR to handle calls, you go and buy one of those. You need some recording, you need some voice analytics. And they bought lots of this technology, and people in their IT department really struggled to integrate it and make it work well. And customers really felt that the telcos appeared very differently when they were talking to them across these channels. And that's interesting because as telcos, we talk all the time about a 360 view of a customer. And yet when you turn that on its head and say, well, what do you look like as a telco to your customer? You look different on Facebook, you look different on Twitter, you look different on the mobile device, and you look different in store. And so in terms of the focus, we're starting to see people, if you like, taking a platform approach. So rather than building these silos again, trying to build something that's able to support all of the channels. For us, consulting and education is critical. The technology piece is an interesting argument. For me, it's about education of staff, education of customers. And this is really all about how that transformation takes place. Customers want to engage in a different way, and those traditional methods are now starting to fall to one side. And of course, execution and improvement. As a company, we've probably done 160 projects across Europe so far in terms of our engagement with customers. And what we're seeing is that they see it very much as a journey. It's not a kind of one-size-fits-all, especially with those that rush to the community forum end of the scale. They've deployed it. And in fact, many of them, I think, are struggling on the back of that because of the challenges that they face around consistency. I know particularly of one telco in the UK that's call rates in the traditional media has gone up significantly on the back of the engagement in a community, which is surprising, particularly because the business case was very much around you could save money. So in terms of the technology as a foundation, of course you have to have all the legacy technologies, we know that, and we have to have the communities, as I've said. For us, it's important to be able to not just listen, but also filter out some of the stuff that's on those digital wires, and use some of the traditional methods like workflow and routing as you would do in a traditional contact center environment. Focusing heavily, obviously, on analytics, but also going back to this position of a 360 view of a customer. So being able to be open enough to integrate to some of the legacy systems that are around in terms of CRM and so on. So what do we see from a consulting and execution point of view? Well, we do see that a lot of our customers are starting to say, well, will you give us confidence with the consulting approach? We are concerned about making mistakes, jumping into this new area for us. We know that it's very visible, and of course we know that we need it to be influential, but we really need to listen to what other customers have done in terms of their own experiences. And that makes a huge difference. I mean, just take a community, for example. How do you get a community going? How do you drive people to that site? How do you get adoption rates? I think it's really interesting if you compare legacy technologies like IVR. When I call into a call centre now, the first message I get is, did you know we've got a website? You can solve your problem at www.solveyourproblems. But actually what customers want is to be able to give them that information from an educational perspective. So when they interact with you and you solve a problem, that's when you push them to the forum. Not just try and deflect calls, if you like, by putting up barriers for them to talk to you. Of course, getting it right is important in terms of first-time success. And timing's everything. The one thing we would say is that customers are really struggling to do all of this. They're tending to take a very staged approach. And they're coming at it, as I say, from either community or social media perspective. The education piece, I think, is very, very big. I use the example here of, teach a man to fish, you can feed him for a day. If you've given a man a fish, you can feed him for a day. If you teach him to fish, he can fish for the rest of his lifetime. It is very much, from a transformation perspective, our view of the world. We're not suggesting that this is a sort of one-size-fits-all. It is very much about taking that approach. The feedback and analytics piece, I think, is of course important, as I've said, in terms of growing that customer relationship. I talked about NPS in terms of net promoter and stuff like the customer satisfaction and customer effort statistics that we see around today, and keeping the focus on investing in technology. So 3 things to consider, and this again is taken from our engagement with customers. And these are 3 kind of key tips that we have. Fish where the fish are. That kind of is obvious, I guess. The one thing I'd say is that fish move about. That's the first thing. And these new digital customers are very dynamic. This is some information we're showing here from Gartner. And we are starting to see the shrinking of those traditional channels. So, for example, interesting ones here. Things like IVR shrinking from 25% to 10% of interactions. And in the green there, social media-based corporate-driven moving from 3% to 20%. So starting to see that engagement happening over the next 2 or 3 year period. We're starting to see increase of video, and of course the community piece growing as well from 12 to 25%. So I think the change is on, definitely the change is on. We're seeing those social media customers rising, and that is reflecting in their preference for this kind of textual-based asynchronous communication in the new digital world. Know the social media characteristics. Again, this seems kind of obvious, but again, I've seen a lot of telcos struggle with this. Of course, the request is public on some of the social media wires, but the answer can be public or private. And when an agent gets a message, they need to acknowledge it. That's obvious for the benefit of the sender and the audience, and make a decision about whether they follow up privately or perhaps whether they choose to do something publicly. And this is all, for us, it's about processing the response to that and making sure that we resolve the issue wherever it is, formulate the solution, and then send out a message to close it out. One of the challenges I think here is, again, the volumes. When we talk to telcos, they struggle with the volumes of being able to sort out what is important, what's not important. The critical thing for us, I think, in terms of the private conversation must be that it resolves the issue, and the public conversation is all about promotion or the kudos of being able to solve that problem. One of the things our customers tend to focus on is having consistency. So if you call into the call centre and the answer is available on Twitter, then you should be able to post that answer to the customer there. If it's on a blog, you should post it there. And of course, that's part of that education process. So rather than giving them a barrier to jump in terms of an IVR, you're pushing them to where the answers are and educating them in that way, rather than saying, just go and look at the website. And of course, the holy grail for social customer care is that kudos of having the answer publicly. Don't be afraid of new risks. I think, again, going back to this thing of confidence, people do tend to be worried about jumping in, and of course, there are potential negative buzz issues or social crisis risk, but the thing is, you can't learn to swim without going to the swimming pool. You've got to jump in and you've got to practice. That's certainly our experience in terms of the engagements we've had. There does seem to be a lot of this kind of, walking around the pool, contemplating whether to jump in or not. And of course, you won't avoid that risk even if you don't go there. So we're starting to see the fact that people are wanting to jump in now as the momentum increases. And of course, I think a good point is that if you do something bad in one of the traditional medias, of course, you still face the issue that social media could give you a challenge. So who has Dimelo helped? So there's a bunch of customers here. You'll see that there's a very heavy French theme. We're a French organisation. We have had a huge success, I think, in terms of French telco. So Orange, Bouygues Telecom, B&U, Meditel in Morocco, and so on. Belgacom also in Belgium. We're starting to engage with customers now outside of France, and hopefully this will be a kind of a step for us to be able to do that. I would say that because of this, I guess, polarization in the marketplace, some people starting in community, some people starting at social media, because we've taken very much a platform approach, that does seem to be resonating with the consulting firms and with the customer bases. Okay. So that's a real quick snapshot of where we are in terms of our view of social customer service maturity. Hopefully that's not been too controversial. If you've got questions, I can take them now, or perhaps we can discuss them over the networking break.